Well, I'm going to have to talk fast. You've got a real pile for me to deal with. I'm going to kind of go back to your Christian Science Sunday School part, and then we'll go from there. Basically, first chapter Genesis basically says, God made everything that He made, and therefore it was very good, and that would indicate that the whole universe was good. There was nothing bad to it. It was infinite, and it was complete, and there was no accidents and no collisions of space objects, and on and on and on like that. You get the drift. And then all of a sudden there was a mist, that overcame everything. And then you had Adam and Eve, and well, God had already made men and women back in the first chapter, but He didn't make them out of each other. They were just male and female, created He them. But in the second chapter of Genesis, He made Adam first, and then the rib, took the rib, and then the other part to eating the apple, and then here's the clinch. They became like gods. I mean, this is what the serpent was, the dark side or whatever is trying to convince them that if they ate that apple, that they wouldn't die, but they would, have the knowledge of good and evil. But you see, they did. They will die eventually. Okay, so keeping that in mind. And so you got the two creations there. And I think that the second creation there gives a lot of room to anthropomorphic God. In other words, a God that's made in the image of man. And, okay, well, I look in the mirror and this is what I see, this is what I think, this is what I do, so therefore God must be the same way. I have my good days, I have my bad days. I do good things, I do bad things. And we have celebrations when we have poverty, and it's in Isaiah, everything turn. The Byrds did the song in the '60s, but anyway, that's and then Job, the whole thing about Job, and you can go on through the Bible there, and the suffering and the suffering and the suffering. The world's had all the suffering and stuff, and I'm going to send you a couple of emails for you to. That would be what I call in conjunction with this talk, because I don't want to get it into a 15-minute talk. One of them is a prophecy, by Hal Lindsey. This is, the guy that is probably one of the most negative thinking Christians I've ever heard in my life. And he's, he just doesn't get it. But anyway, you just need to be aware of what he's telling everybody, because that's a big crew, especially here in the South. The rapture people, the people that believe in the rapture, and they made that movie Left Behind and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like, okay, if you don't believe what they believe, you're kind of like the ugly kid on the when they choose teams, for volleyball, and you're the last one picked, where they don't pick you, and and they get to beat the crap out of you because you're a nerd, and they're bullies and you're not. That kind of Christianity. Okay, I mean, I can really see where Stalin and Marx and all them guys, religion's the opiate of the masses. I mean, I'm looking at, and I don't mean to be critical. I mean, some of the most wonderful people I ever met in my life were Catholics. I'm talking about the top end. Even in the Christian Science Church, all these hierarchy churches, and it's like a joke. And I can see the hypocrisy and the corruption and the this sin and be sorry stuff, and the ethics are in the toilet, and all this, and I've tried very hard in my life to very hard. I've tried very, very hard to maintain ethics. Am I 100%? No, not even 80%. But I've got good numbers. I know that, and that's not brag. It's fact. And I've never hurt anyone unless I was defending myself, and that's after high school, that's never happened. Okay, so I don't cheat people out of money, and on and on. You don't need to hear all that. But anyway, moving along here, the other part I'm going to send you is a deal about The Secret, and there's a healing on there, a testimony of a 6-year-old girl that was healed of bone cancer. And I'd like you to read that. And now here we get down to the nitty gritty. Okay, I have heard that they asked Buddha, "What are you, a prince?" And he said, "No." "Well, are you a king?" And he said, "No." And are you? I can't remember what the third thing was, but they asked him, and he said, "No." And a prophet, I think. "Are you a prophet?" He said, "No." And they get, "Well, then what are you?" He says, "I'm awake." Okay, now that's what the secret is all about, and I think this is what Mary Baker Eddy was talking about too. Is that it's not this glorified human being, the anthropomorphic man or God made in our image. That's not it. The reality probably is the universe, the real universe. Now, what is the real universe? Well, it ain't what you're seeing. Nothing here that you see or feel or touch or anything is the universe. It is a counterfeit of the universe. Okay, and I know people get tired of hearing that, especially from Christian Science and stuff. But let me move on. I'm an auto mechanic. Okay, I work on cars. Okay, I am a pretty smart guy, but I don't have all those grids. Especially when you're getting into the OBD2 sensor array and all the inputs, outputs, and everything for a 84 baud computer and the oxygen sensors, heated oxygen sensors, and all the upstream, downstream info, and all the black box stuff and everything. I mean, you got to be, if you're tall in the brain if you can keep all that in your head. Okay, so what do you got to do? You got to go. Well, used to they were manuals. You had these big books, and you flipped through the book, and they had these engineering drawings, which we would call blueprint. Okay, now what is a blueprint? Okay, it is a idea written out on paper. It's kind of a recording of an idea. All ideas are invisible, Peter. All ideas are invisible. You can't touch them. You can't feel them. They're not tangible. The only thing you can do with an idea is manifest it. In other words, you can only take that idea and make it real. Okay, and then here comes the question. If you're going to make it real, what are you going to make it out of? Are you going to make it out of substance? Okay, well, what substance is that? Well, in this world, it's matter. Matter is a substance. But is that really what it is? Because even the physicists and stuff are beginning to have all kinds of doubts about matter. It's too iffy. So then what is, well, Mrs. Eddy says spirit is substance. Okay, well, we don't know a lot about that. We really don't. Okay, but when you read these healings, like this young girl had of bone cancer, and my healing of testicular cancer back in the 1970s, when, oh my God, what I would have to go through, and I would have probably died. Okay, there are glimpses of the real, and that's kind of what hangs me. It gets me. It gets me, man. And I only know this much. Okay. But anyway, I get emotional. Passionate, emotional Irishman. Okay. Anyway, I went to a funeral of a friend of mine. She died way too early. I went to her funeral, and the people were Pentecostals, and she was a liberal Democrat, and they hated her, and it was awful. And the preacher, they got some kind of preacher to give it. He was okay, but he didn't really say anything good about her. Not really. I mean, just broad statements and stuff. And then at the end, he says, "Anybody want to say anything?" Well, I felt compelled to stand up and say something, and I said, if you go to Detroit, Michigan, and you open the vault there at General Motors, they'll have a blueprint for a '57 Chevy. Okay, it's been sitting in there for 40 something years. Okay, you take that blueprint out of that locker or that archive and safe, and you lay it on the table, and you tell all the engineers, okay, we're going to make a '57 Chevy because everybody likes them. There's a nostalgia wave running around. Everybody wants one. And so they gear up the line and everything, and they make a '57 Chevy all over again. Okay, here again, the idea. The idea is eternal, is infinite. and it's of the universe. One of the leaders of the Christian Science Church was on Larry King here a long time ago. She said that the idea of the Boeing 747 has existed in the universe for ever, millions and zillions of years, but it had to be discovered. The pieces had to come to mind. Okay, so, and look what we've seen in 100 years. I mean, let me tell you, when I worked on cars in 1965, I'd get the old ones every once in a while. I'm talking about before the Second War, some of the old 36 Chevys and stuff like that. And everything was iron and heavy, and, there's no such thing as power steering or automatic transmissions or air conditioning and none of that stuff. And the body parts were like 30 thousandths thick, and you could hit them with a hammer and it'd bounce off, and there's spring steel bumpers. And like Jay Leno said, you could, have a wreck and hose the owner off the dash and sell the car. I mean, they were a tank, okay? But they were underpowered, and they had all kinds of problems, and they had a very short lifespan. Well, you know what it is with a car today. I mean, you do. I mean, you know what's happened in 100 years. Well, was that all molecules and matter and, carnality and everything? Hell no. It was ideas and mind, okay? And so I like The Secret. It talks about God being, doesn't really say the word God per se, but the universe. The universe is this tremendous force of ideas, tremendous force, kind of like the Star Wars thing, the Force, But I like the other part about it is that it's tuned into you, and your, it's kind of like your wish is its command. What you want or your thinking determines your experience, and so. And you know how that goes. Every day is different. One day your thinking's awesome, and there is some lag time. I mean, you can think something, and it may take weeks, months, years before it happens. But Jesus always said, "Knock on the door and it'll be open," and all that kind of stuff. So, all right, well that's 10 megabytes. I better quit. Yeah, this is a good discussion, and I hope you can understand some of this stuff, and sorry about the emotional outburst, but I've survived, now over 40 years. And when I went to the doctor, and she found out I had testicular cancer, and it was untreated. In other words, I didn't have radiation, I didn't have chemo, I didn't have anything. And then she, I told her what kind of procedures they were using in 1974, she said, "Oh, God, I don't know how anybody could live through that." Well, they didn't, and not very often. And so, and of course we know Lance Armstrong, even though he's done a lot of bad things, he was healed. It went in remission, and the doctor still, that's Baylor over in Waco, that's a big medical deal. They don't really understand why he went in remission. Okay, so, that just gives proof to, I've always kind of had a hard time with, well, I'm a sinner and I probably can't be healed because I'm a sin. I got to go get rid of all the sin and then come back. No, you can be a sinner big time and be healed. Jesus healed them. He didn't ask if they had sin. He just said, don't sin anymore. Straighten it out. Straighten out your thought. And I guess sin just means that your idea is missing the mark. That's really the essentials of it. But anyway, I think that. You kids, your millennial kids or whatever you're called, you're pretty wise. I mean, you don't fall for the, this what I call easy Christianity. Where you just say, okay, or you say, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and now I can go out and get drunk on my ass and shack up with 35 women and do all this unethical business behavior and everything like that, and then. Oh, it's okay, Jesus died on the cross so I can be forgiven. No, where the tree falls, that's where it lies. And if you die, and if we don't know the if, but if you get up on the other side, you get up just right where you were, except the only thing you know now is that you didn't die. And that's but nobody really knows, Peter. I'm not blowing smoke. But anyway. By the way, got a quick little joke for you. The Pope, he quit, and so they're going to have a new Pope. And they know down there at the Vatican that whenever they select a Pope, because it's all done in secret, and they have a little fire and they send some smoke up a smokestack, and there's a puff of smoke, to let you know they've chosen a new Pope. Kind of like the puff of smoke at these state capitals that legalize marijuana.